David McCoy, thank you. Go ahead, Madison.
If women want equality, why don't women fight to be included in the draft? Seems like they want rights without responsibility.
Oh my god, the way responsibility is spelled. Sorry, I don't want to be. Also, I think a lot of people are just against it. The draft hasn't been triggered in over 50 years, and I think if it was, people would have an issue with it, including a lot of feminists.
Yeah, well, feminists, their official position, if you have one official position as a feminist group, is to abolish the draft entirely.
Yeah,
so, for men.
I agree with that.
Yeah, but that's kind of wishful thinking. It occurs to me that a country needs to have a draft in the event of some sort of catastrophic war. I don't think a draft is good, but it's plausible that a country would need to call upon its citizens to defend said country.
I don't think anyone should be forced by their government to go die for the country. That's
then who would be, I mean...
If we don't have enough people that volunteer to do it,
sure.
then that's... But I don't believe the answer is forcing people. That's me, though, so...
Okay, so then you've basically surrendered your country to...
I think
an
it's... I'd rather
force.
surrender my country than
Matthew
force people
McCarthy
against their will.
donated $99. Brian Shat named me Giga Simp Simpaloo and requested me on next with my boobala ha ha. Let's make it happen. I promise you'll break your donation record. Do my research for both sides, and when I'm wrong I take accountability. To everyone, does body count matter?
We'll touch on body count in just a bit. Thank you, man. Appreciate it, Matt. Okay, so we were talking about the draft.
Draft.
Well, I actually think that's a really solid argument for why feminism is not actually about true equality.
Why? She just said the feminist position is to abolish the draft for both genders.
Well, I mean...
And it hasn't been triggered in 50 years. Anyone who's like talking about the draft is like they're like that's the topic that they're focused on, is focused on something bizarre.
It hasn't been triggered in 50 years, but all men over the age of 18, upon turning 18, have to register for the draft.
Yeah, and I'm against that, but it hasn't been nobody in our generation.
No, but you're not gonna get rid of the draft. Therefore, we ought to equalize it.
I think that if it was to get triggered, I would be on the front line of saying that nobody should be allowed on it. Nobody should be allowed in it.
Okay, that's great. War is terrible.
Okay, well, aren't you the one that
war
said
happens?
Okay, so aren't you the one that just said that if there's like physical standards for getting in to do firefighting, if there are physical standards to get into the war, a lot of women wouldn't meet those requirements?
Right, but you could be drafted into the war effort and have a supportive role. You don't. But women are But women are entirely exempt from even being drafted into a support role that doesn't even face the risk of seeing combat.
Okay, so in that sense, if we're gonna have a draft, sure, we can both be in it, but I'm saying neither of us should be in it. So.
Well, but there shouldn't be war. Like it's just such.
Even if there is war, I don't believe in a draft. That's what I'm saying. Now, if we're gonna have one anyway, I don't think it's fair that just men are drafted. I'll give you that. Right,
but women aren't in the streets like demanding that they be.
Because this is a non-issue right now.
It's not a non-issue.
Yes, none of our lives right now are impacted by the draft. Not a single person.
No, that's wrong, because men are required to register upon turning 18.
Yes.
There's certain. It's harder to potentially qualify for certain. I believe student loans. You're barred from certain federal jobs if you aren't registered. Technically, on the books, it's a felony. There's a $500,000 fine. Now, whether a prosecutor would actually prosecute it, no, but perhaps in wartime they might prosecute it.
Yeah, in wartime. So when this is
it's
the reason people aren't on the street is because it's not wartime, and so most men that are registering for the draft, that's the end of what they do.
I mean, we're arguably in the least stable place in the past 40 years.
And there isn't any like talk of the draft being triggered by anyone other than the manosphere.
No, but it's a totally valid thing. For example, like you're a woman here in California, I'm assuming, well, I shouldn't assume, but here in California, you can secure an abortion.
Yeah.
Did you take quarrel with Roe v. Wade being overturned, even though your right to an abortion in California is secure?
Yes, because I believe in substantive due process.
It doesn't affect you.
But it's a constitutional right that I think was taken away. And it didn't just take away that. If we want to get into the law and substantive due process, I'm obviously very familiar with it. We can get into that. But it completely took out substantive due process out of the Constitution, which does also, like people have made the argument, affect decisions like Loving v. Virginia, the right of your children to go to the school you want.
I'm not interested, at least right now.
So the reason that I have an issue with Roe v. Wade being
let me finish.
Okay.
I'm not interested right now in having an abortion discussion, but
Okay.
this idea that, it doesn't really impact anybody, that there's the draft. Well, it's just not true. It does impact people. There's men who, because they failed to register, are barred from getting certain loans. They're barred from getting entry in certain government federal jobs.
Every male's life in the United States today is their only thing is registering for the draft and then going on and living their normal life. So it'd be weird if people were just on the streets. If people were on the streets protesting to abolish the draft and I saw that, I'd be like, oh shit, what's going on? Like, is there a war happening? Because in general, people don't go on the streets and start picketing for something that isn't happening. It's just not happening. All that's happening is they have to register.
So should women in California not fight for, even though there's pretty much zero chance?
But it's a constitutional right, and I care about other women.
Constitutional right?
I think it's a constitutional
right.
right. So if we want to get into that, we can. But it's also other women are impacted. It's not like no men in the United States right now, other than being impacted by having to register for something.
Well, that's actually not true. There are men alive today who were drafted.
Yeah, but
in the Vietnam War.
Yes, but there hasn't been, for men that now turn 18 and have to register, it's not going to be a significant part of their lives. If there becomes a time where it is a part of their lives and they are being drafted, I think we would see people out on the street. I'm almost certain we'd see people out on the street.
No, probably not.
I think
Very
so.
unlikely.
Well,
here's a bigger one. There are men who would be alive today had there not been the draft.
And I just said I don't like drafts.
That's great. That's great. But this is a specifically male focused issue.
So if we want to go back, if we want to do tit for tat back in history, we can go at it, Brian. But yeah, here's an example. I don't think those men should have been drafted. I'm very sorry that they lost their lives fighting for our country. But if we want to go back in time and talk about when women were oppressed or men were oppressed, we could do that.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Well, this is kind of, the reason why this was mentioned is because of women not wanting responsibility, like draft for voting. How do you guys feel about service guaranteeing citizenship? We get rid of the draft, but hey, if you want to be able to vote, you have to do some sort of service, including military.
My thoughts?
Yeah. Everybody's thoughts.
Everyone.
So in order to vote, you have to just sign up for the military?
Or some other form of service. But the idea that a vote is not... in Korea, I think there's not just military service. They also have different types of service. I think some people might have like religious qualifications, but the idea that it's often talked about in the manosphere, women want white rights without the responsibility. And that's an issue that I have with the feminist movement as well. And it's an issue I have with universal suffrage. So what about the idea that if you actually want this right, you also have to take on responsibility?
So that's not gender specific.
No.
So that's just, I think it depends on what would qualify. If it's accessible to everybody, like paying tax, no. But like if it's accessible to everybody, then sure. But I think it would just create barriers where certain people who had the privilege to sign up for this stuff or had the privilege, like versus someone who's just struggling to get by, is working a bunch of hours, can't also have time to serve their community, that they don't get a vote. That would be my worry there. But it's not gendered.
So like civil service type stuff?
Right.
Or?
Like they have to do community, like pick up trash. Like what exactly is your...
I think that should qualify. I don't like the idea that, and this is often why the draft is brought up, because it's in relation to the 19th Amendment. Women were given the right to vote, but unlike men, we never had to register for the right to draft. And I think that's a legitimate grievance that a lot of men have. And I'm just thinking of ways that we could seek to remedy that, but also not have zero military.
So my remedy is just different than yours. I would abolish the draft.
That's just never going to happen, though. You can't abolish the draft.
I think that there would definitely be a conversation about it. We're talking about, again, some crazies, like we're going to go to war, and now the draft. I think clearly we haven't used the draft, even though we've had wars in the last 50 years, because there have been people that have volunteered to go. We didn't use it for the Iraq war. We haven't used it in Afghanistan. We haven't used it. And I think if there was another war, I don't think we would use it, because I think people know there'd be an uproar about it in 2023. And I would be on the front line saying we should abolish it, not saying men should be the only ones who have to go.
Right. It hasn't been used in a long time, but that still nothing to diminish the fact that men are still subject to military conscription.
That's what I'm saying. It shouldn't be the case, but I'm also saying the reason it's not a main issue is because any man who's going to bed or waking up like, oh my God, I'm in the draft, you should get a job and work like focus on things that are actually happening to you.
Well, that's rather.
But I guess-
that's
but
rather.
that's-
Let me just say
sorry.
one thing. That's rather dismissive of men's concerns when it comes to their, they're basically being forced to die in a military conflict.
And
you might think that that's
I don't think-
fanciful. That
yeah.
you might think there's not a strong likelihood that, well, certainly in the U.S. perhaps not, but take for example Ukraine, which is starting to become a fairly westernized country. Still to this day, men between the ages of I believe 18 to 60, maybe even 65, they're unable to leave the country.
Yeah, okay. And if
No
we
limit. There's no such limit on women.
Okay, but if we want to go
Ukrainian women.
globally on tit for tat for women, a lot of places women still can't go to schools. Women still can't even drive in some places. So if we're going to go globally,
We can go globally.
yeah. So if we're going to go globally, I think there are far more examples of women still being oppressed. Especially, I mean, like I told you, my parents are from Iran. You see what's going on there. Women are getting killed for not covering their hair. That's not happening anywhere in the world for men. And so if we're gonna, I think Western society is one where it's more fair. But if we're going to go globally, then I think globally, women. That's one example where men may be disadvantaged, but we can find far more with women have less access to education. Women are still getting killed for having sex outside of marriage in some places. Like honor killings disproportionately affect women. Child marriages affect
Yeah, I
women.
mean, we can go back and forth.
Exactly.
With
That's why I didn't want to use the Ukraine argument.
Privilege or victim Olympics. We
Exactly.
can go back and forth. I mean, but I'd actually be prepared to make the argument that globally speaking, men are. Oh God. Okay. I mean, the sole male grievance of forced military conscription, in my estimation, dwarfs all of women's collective grievances combined.
Really? It's something that isn't even
donated
affecting them?
$100. Abolish the draft. Make military service compulsory for both men and women, with civil service as an alternative for those who are not physically qualified. Voting rights tied to service. Service guarantees citizenship. Would you like to know more?
Thank you,
Starship
Raven.
Trooper
Did you wanted to come in on something, Lauren?
Well, I guess to better understand why someone like Brian might be upset about it, you were clearly upset about the idea of Roe versus Wade being taken from you. But think about it. A man can do a lot less to ensure he's not drafted than a woman can do to ensure she doesn't need an abortion.
So I would say the difference is Roe v. Wade does affect, there have been women since Roe v. Wade has been overturned that weren't able to have access to an abortion. There haven't been men in the last 50 years that have been drafted. So, and it's not
Well,
something.
men don't have any reproductive rights to begin with.
That's
That's
because the
true.
baby isn't in your body. So once the baby's born, the laws are gender neutral. Once the baby's born, what happens is whichever parent, if there's one primary caregiver, then they're entitled to child support from the other. So child support is actually going up from women to men now because there are more men that are in the primary caretaker role. Or neither of you can be the parent and you guys can give it up for adoption now, neither of you. But once it's so fair because it's literally once the baby's in the stomach of the woman, then she has rights that the male doesn't have. But as soon as the child is born, it's equal. So you have a problem with biology, honestly.
No, I don't have a problem with biology.
Okay, so what's your problem?
What do you mean?
That you're mad that men don't have reproductive rights, but men don't carry children.
Well, there's whatever the choice may be. Let's say the woman wants to get rid of the child. The man has no say there. If she wants to keep the child, the man has no say there. And then also there's a term called, I'm trying to recall what it is, it's legal paternal surrender. So let's say the woman wants to have the kid, the guy doesn't. They're in a legal paternal surrender scenario, the guy could say, well, I don't want to have any legal obligation to the child.
Mm-hmm.
So not being subject to having to pay for child support, for example.
Okay, so so there's a reproductive right, I guess. I didn't even know about that.
That's not something that is the case.
Oh, well, that's not. So once the child is born, for instance, if the woman said, I don't actually want it after it's born, but the father wants it, even if she wants to give it away for adoption, she can't now. As long as he's fit to be a parent, he's now the primary custody. He is now the primary custodian, and she has to pay him child support. So once the child is born, tell me where it's not fair. It's only when the child is.
But I'm saying before the child is born.
Yeah, so do you think if men carried the child, do you think it would be like...
Well, that's a biological impossibility.
Exactly. So because it's a biological impossibility, I'm sorry that the world made it so that the child is in our bodies, and that's just the reality of biology. It's not because we set out to have it that way. I think a lot of women would love if their husbands could carry the child instead, or the men could
That's
carry
not the argument I'm making.
So what is the argument you're making? That
Well,
while the child is in...
That this idea that abortion is necessarily a gendered issue, men just have no reproductive rights to begin with.
They don't have reproductive rights when the child is not using their body as a host. That's the only time they don't have reproductive rights that are equal to women.
Sure.
Okay. So that's an issue with biology. I don't know what to tell you there. It's not, we didn't decide to be the ones that carry children, but we are the ones that carry children, which means that is the case. Now, if men could carry children too, I'd be all in favor of them being able to make the same decisions with their body that women should be able to make.
Right. There's obviously biological differences, but again, the point I'm trying to make is that men don't have any reproductive rights. Now, we can have a debate over what that would potentially look like. But what I'm trying to say is men don't have any reproductive rights.
But men aren't carrying children, and that's why, which is a
so
it's a biological inequality that I guess for men it sucks in this instance.
I don't know how we got to that.
I don't
either. I don't know where I was going with that. But did you have something more, Lauren, or?
Not that I remember.
I would just point out that this is a draft registration card here, and note it says men 18 to 25. You can handle this. You can handle this. And there's, don't let the colors fool you. That's the registration portion. All men have to do this when they turn 18.
Do most men do it? I'm just curious. What are the
Well, I mean, I have. So I'm not from America, so I know a lot of other people who have kind of immigrated later, and I have had some of my college friends who've gotten green cards later on in life kind of joke about, hey, if it takes just a few more years, I don't have to register for the draft. So it is something that they at least are prompted about, especially if you're kind of.
Do you get an email when you're 18? I just don't know how it works.
Yeah.
How does it? Do you get that in the mail?
No, but I mean, in every single post office in the United States, there's going to be something like this.
How many of you guys have seen that? I feel like
well, who knows?
It's not a part of our lives in America, and it hasn't been for a long time, besides the fact that people can just say men have to register and women can't. And I agree that's unfair. No one should have to register. But of course, people are not going to be. People are figuring out how to put food over their food on their table, a roof over their heads. Nobody cares about the draft right now. It's not a thing.
Well, it's very easy for you to be so dismissive over something that is actually quite important.
But it's not important to anyone's daily activities of living in 2023. And it's not. It's not. How is it?
Because in the event of a war, it would be very important.
But we've had wars since that we haven't
used it. A war that required a draft.
We haven't even spoken, other than in these spaces.
A war that required a draft.
We haven't even talked about, except in these spaces, the possibility of reinstating the draft. Every time we talk about going to war, we have a military full of volunteers, and I think the government would do more if we needed more recruits to incentivize people to volunteer, paying them more, which I think they should get paid more, giving them more benefits. I think those are ways we could recruit people.
We have not had an enemy that necessitated a draft.
I mean, we went through 9/11 and we still didn't necessitate the draft.
Because now we can have an argument over whether it was appropriate to have invaded the Middle East.
It wasn't, in my opinion, but that doesn't mean that we did anyway.
Yes,
so why
didn't we use
the draft?
I think it was a mistake. However, there are two opponents that occur to me where a draft may be necessary. For example, China or Russia.
And when that time comes, then we can talk about it. But right now, I don't think...
When that time comes, what are you talking about?
It's not happening right now. Nobody's talking about using... Okay, right now, if we went to war with China or Russia, I think it would be a huge deal, and we would all be discussing what to do. But I think the first step wouldn't be to, okay, get on the news, the draft is reinstated, everyone pack up, all men pack up, go to your local airport and get ready to be shipped out. I don't think that's how things would go. I think, one, we do have the biggest military in the world, full of volunteers currently. I don't know if we need more people.
Hold on.
Alvin Sam donated $99. Jasmine, you're failing to understand. The draft itself is not the argument. The requirement to apply is, and that is significant to a man's daily life because it carries legal consequences if we refuse to apply.
If
Thank
the
you,
biggest
Alvin.
issue for a man in 2023 right now is that he had to spend 10 minutes registering for something that's very likely to not come to fruition, then men have it far better than I thought they did.
But I guess it's not just the time it takes to register, it's the legal weight behind what you're registering for. Like, as a man, just in terms of principle, is it fair, is it right that you should have to volunteer for the, or register for the
No,
draft?
it's not.
Right, but don't you understand people who want to tackle that now? Like, shouldn't that be a bigger deal?
Sure, and if that's an issue that you're really passionate about, sure, but I think that if we were to make a list of issues going on in our country right now, it wouldn't be in the top 20, in my opinion. Now, if there's some guy who just feels like he's being psychologically tormented because he's so afraid of going into the draft, then sure, but a lot of Americans are concerned about other things that are affecting their daily life instead of...
But let's say there was some event. I mean, again, it's very dismissive. Yeah, we haven't had a draft in a very long time. Is it looking like there's going to be a draft? No. But if there's some scenario where shit hits the fan, there's not going to be like a protracted discussion over, oh, should we do the draft? Like, it's going to come quick and it's going to be like, okay, you're drafted. In addition to that, he did mention some of the other things. So it is technically, let me see here. It is technically a felony. Failure to register may be fined up to $250,000, imprisoned for up to 5 years. In addition to being subject to prosecution, failure to register may cause you to permanently forfeit eligibility of certain benefits. So federal and many state laws require registration age men to be registered with the Selective Service to remain eligible for applying for the following benefits: student financial aid, government employment, employment with the U.S. Postal Service, job training, and U.S. citizenship for male immigrants.
Yeah, so like I said, I don't like this. I want this to be changed. But I think for men, there are a lot of things we should be focusing on. The education gap, the issues with, I want you guys to make more money, to get paid more for your work. I wouldn't right now be picketing for eliminating the draft, because even though you have to register and even though there could be those consequences, like you said, they're not usually enforced. I haven't heard of a case, at least maybe I'm just unfamiliar with any case where someone's been...
in peacetime, certainly they're not going to be enforced. Although when it comes to criminal prosecution, not really being enforced. However, the negative consequences that I just listed, that's not a question of enforcement. Like, if you don't register for the draft, then you're fucked when it comes to, the financial aid thing I talked about, getting certain jobs.
If, like, this is what I mean. If someone had a petition and they're like, to abolish the draft, I would sign it. But am I going to spend my time, my resources, my energy right now fighting for this issue? I don't think, like I said, if we polled Americans right now, it's about to be a voting year. What is your top issues? I don't think the draft would even get like 3%.
And that's because there's just a general lack of caring when it comes to men's issues.
No, I think it's just a general lack of caring about something that's not happening.
It is happening, though. There is a requirement for men to register for the Selective Service. Now, we're not in war. It's not wartime, so there's
people
not an
don't
active
care about
draft.
it because it's not affecting their lives. If it was affecting their lives, I think it would be a voting issue. It's clearly not. It's the only people who care about it are the manosphere.
It's never going to be an issue because it's just the de facto. It's the default. Men are just viewed as the disposable sex.
No, I think it's not an issue because men are worried about how they can feed their families. They're not worried about potentially being kicked into a draft, which doesn't seem like it's coming to us anytime soon. $500 to mute me.
I think that does trigger a mute.
All right, that's fine. I'm tired of this issue anyway.
Hold on, let me see. You come in, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if I can follow that, but I was just going to mention how it's important to remember that as technology advances, the need for physical people in the military is being reduced. And so, as we progress, I think that the issue of the draft potentially could be resolved in the way that no one would need it. We just wouldn't need it. And also another thing I think is important to remember is that when there's some sort of war, people usually want to support their country and their side, and there is usually a bit of an uptick in volunteers.
Hold on just a
Aaron
sec.
Amott donated $101. I'm a litigator. Of lawyer, I'd run circles around you in court. You literally have no credibility by denying the possibility of a war big enough to need a draft. No real lawyer would be so short-sighted. So stop pretending to be one. You clearly aren't.
Short-sighted. Nick, it's a 10-minute mute on number 9, is it? All right. Sorry, Jasmine. we'll get you back. We'll get yeah. You were saying that. I'm sorry.
It's true.
Because the TTS came in and interrupted you a little bit.
Oh yeah, there's usually an uptick in volunteers that want to support their country in some sort of event,
Sure.
Just yeah. So I think it is possible that we can move forward past the need for a draft.
But I mean, it would require a war that had some like righteous cause. I mean, the last time the draft was used was in Vietnam, and I mean, I don't think there was a big push from civilians to be like, whoa, this is like a really good cause here.
No, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I mean, that's just a small percentage in some cases. Historically, that's been the case. So of course it depends on the situation, but yeah, I think the technology thing is pretty relevant in the fact that is currently reducing our need for physical manpower in our military.
Yeah, I mean, warfare is being fought differently, but
yeah, like compared to Vietnam, the last time we had a draft, there's no way we need that many bodies again. Like,
well, we shouldn't have been in Vietnam.
Well, of course, I agree with that. Absolutely. But yeah, I think that because of the way that we're fighting war and that's changing, I think that could eliminate our need for a draft.
There you have it. Okay, Nick, can you pull up?
Oh, I was just going to say one thing. Actually, a couple things. I feel like if there was to be like a draft, first of all, I feel like a lot of men actually wouldn't want like their women to be involved in the draft. I feel like they would fight really hard to protect them not being involved. I also think that if there was a draft, I actually think a lot of women would actually want to be involved in the draft to stand up for the country and be more equal to men, just with how like things are these days. And also, if this is such a huge deal, which I agree that it is, and I think that it could actually possibly scare me too if I was a man. But I don't understand why men then aren't like fighting more for us to just like all try to abolish the draft. Because I think most women, if not all women, would like support that claim that there just shouldn't be a draft.
Because there's not really solidarity amongst men in the same way that there's solidarity amongst women. They've done studies on this, and women have a strong in-group bias for other women, and men have a slight out-group bias for women. So there's not like going to be that same level of solidarity. There's also not like the giant machine that is feminism that's just like pumping out and digging its nails into like all these realms of human endeavor.